My name is Luis Espinosa, and I'm the Director for the Office of Evangelization and Catechesis. As we continue talking about the Liturgy of the Eucharist, we want to first focus on this next part, which is the preparation of the gifts. The preparation of the gifts is going to be broken up into at least two parts. We're going to see specific numbers from the general instruction of the Roman Missal. So we've come to the point where if it hasn't happened, a hymn will be sung, either a hymn or a chant, to help us to be able to understand what is going to be taking place. So we just experienced that we were standing for the universal prayer, the prayer of the faithful. We now sit. And so the hymn begins. And so normally a procession would take place. A procession where the gifts are going to be brought, but also the altar is being prepared. And so 73 says the following: At the beginning of the Liturgy of the Eucharist, the gifts which will become Christ's body and blood are brought to the altar. So now this is broken down into a few paragraphs to make mention of what takes place. So it says, first of all, the altar of the Lord's table, which is the center of the whole Liturgy of the Eucharist, is made ready when on it are placed the corporal, purificator, Missal, and chalice. And so these are placed on the altar as a way to prepare for the next part in the preparation of the gifts. And so we're going to notice that the servers, the deacon, if there's an instituted acolyte, will be helping with these preparations of the altar. And that then we will experience that there will be a procession being led by the processional cross by a server, followed by people who are bringing the bread and the wine, and maybe even a collection. Because that has been our experience, that usually the collection is brought forth as part of the offertory, part of the offering. And so it continues by saying, the offerings are then brought forth. It is praiseworthy practice for the bread and wine to be presented by the faithful. They are then accepted at an appropriate place by the priest or the deacon to be carried to the altar. Even though the faithful no longer bring from their own possessions the bread and wine intended for the liturgy, as once was the case, nevertheless, the rite of carrying up the offerings still keeps its spiritual efficacy and significance. So then from what we have received from God, we in turn, that is what we're offering as we're bringing these gifts. So it used to be the practice, what was brought forth was maybe even subsistence for the priest, for the ministers. And so at some cases, the people in place of this bread and wine, or together with the bread and wine, would bring forth from their harvest, from all that they have received. So they bring this as an offering to help with providing support to the church, to the parish, for the priest. And so these things are brought forth. 73 continues by saying, even money or other gifts of the poor of the church, brought by the faithful or collected in the church, are acceptable. Given their purpose, they are to be put in a suitable place away from the Eucharistic table. So this tells us that if anything other than the bread and wine that is going to be offered as part of the sacrifice, that all these things are to be put in a separate place away from the altar. Again, emphasizing that if anything extra is brought, that they be placed away from the altar. So 74 now talks a little bit about that offertory chant that could be done. Again, it's that it could be done. It says the procession bringing the gifts is accompanied by the offertory chant, which continues at least until the gifts have been placed on the altar. The norms on the manner of the singing are the same as for the entrance chant. Singing may always accompany the rite of the offertory, even when there is no procession with the gifts. So I want to be able to take time to highlight two things here. First of all, that the procession normally is accompanied by the singing. Here again is the singing of the chant or another hymn, and that the singing helps with giving us that ability to sing what is taking place. And so emphasizing about that the offertory is being brought forth, but also that we should be aware that we should be also offering ourselves with the bread and the wine, so that we can also be transformed, so that we can undergo that conversion. And so a couple of things that we look at is that once the gifts are placed on the altar, once they're brought to be prepared by the priest, that there should be a clear distinction of whether or not the priest will audibly say those specific prayers. And so we don't want a competition between the singing of the chant or the hymn by the choir or by the priest who's reciting some prayers. So there should be some dialogue between the priest celebrant and the choir. So if the priest is going to say those prayers audibly or loud, then the choir should bring the singing to a close, so that the people can respond to those parts that the priest is saying as he prepares the gifts. And so normally our experience is that the singing continues and the priest in a quiet or low voice says those preparatory prayers for the bread and the wine. What I want you to focus next time you participate in any of our masses is that you look at what happens as either the deacon or the priest himself is preparing the chalice. So some of the words, some of the text or the prayers that are said are done silently or in a low voice. So when we talk about the preparation of the chalice itself with the wine and the water, there's a prayer that is said. Again, if the priest is the one preparing the chalice, he says this prayer silently, or the deacon says it silently. He says, "By the mystery of this water and wine, may we come to share in the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to share in our humanity." So this prayer is for us to be aware of, that when the gifts are being prepared, especially the chalice, is for us to understand that this is one of the things that is part of the church's prayer as the gifts are being prepared. That we would be aware of this mystery and that we would be cognizant of the fact that Christ, being God, or Jesus being God, he took on our humanity. He became like us. He became like us except for sin. And so we want to keep this in mind, and every time we see that preparation of the chalice, to think about who Christ is, who Jesus is. Jesus is true God and true man, and that he makes himself available to us. And so in the preparation of the gifts, again, remembering that normally this takes place after the prayer of the faithful, and it is a preparation of the gifts that starts with the procession and that continues as the priest prepares the bread and the wine, so that these become those offerings, those sacrifices that will in turn be turned into the body and blood of Jesus Christ.